Hi everyone, can you hear me? Is this working? Okay. Thanks again for coming. It's a slightly irregular Center for Poetry and Poetics event because I'm not running it. So, which is a great relief to myself and probably to you too. My name is Llew Watkins and I'm the director or co-director of the Center for Poetry and Poetics Ireland. And this is the opening event for a rather rich schedule to follow in February, March, April, and May. Just information-wise, what we do, you can find us on the Center for Poetry and Poetics, a very basic Tumblr website, but there is now also an in-house website. So if you kind of Google Center for Poetry and Poetics and Creative Writing, the School of English will have a website too, but you can only access it at the moment if you are on campus or if you've got a VPN. I'm saying this because you can find the entire schedule for the various events. This first one is celebratory, informal, rich, beautiful, sort of PhD focused event of our creative writers who are also doing the PhDs, but they're also writers. They are doing their PhDs in writing, who will showcase their work and tell you a little bit about what they are doing within the individual projects, how they go on about their methods, the various research topics. Their name, they've given themselves a name, the kind of eerie sounding Apparition Conglomerate, which I know nothing about, but Heather will tell you a little bit more once I finish talking. The only thing I'd like to say is the next event is going to be a rather big one with Helen Mort, Angelina De Rosa, who's also a PhD student here, and Gareth Gavin from Manchester, and this will be a day before my birthday, just so you know. Bring lots of prezzies. On that, I will be running that too. So the 28th of February. And then the next event closer to today, which you might still remember, is the 14th of March. It's going to be a Pamanar Press, an international small press event, and authors such as Fran Locke will be reading along with J.R. Carpenter, Safa Fati, and Kazal Mossadegh. And there's a good few more events, but I'm not going to kind of burden you with that for now because you won't remember. But that's us. Enjoy the show, which will be non-stop. So a good, I'd say, hour and a half as of now. Maybe. And that's all from me. Heather Beier.
Hi, thank you firstly for coming. It's a really great opportunity for all of us as PhD students as well. So the Apparition Conglomerate pretended it was sort of democracy rather than a dictatorship and did a bit of a poll and decided on a name. Based on that, we're a group of current PhD creative writing students from the University of Sheffield. We also meet monthly for a creative writing workshop, where no genre or creative space is left untouched or unexamined. And tonight we'll be delving into the poetic, the experimental, and the fictitious. We'll be hearing from experienced writers who have many publications under the belt, as well as those who have never really done a reading before. They'll introduce themselves, their PhD, and their creative work. So it's my pleasure to introduce AJ Moore, Beverley Thomas, Leonie Martin, Catherine Greenwood, Ella Ruby Self, Llew Watkins, Meg Meredith, and me, Heather Beier. So we've got Meg first. Want to kick it off? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Can I just check that you can all hear me, first of all? The microphone's doing its job, lovely. So thank you, Heather, for putting us together and organising this. Yeah, that's been fantastic. I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone else's stuff as well. So I'm Meg. I'm a PhD student, University of Sheffield, funded by the White Rose College of Arts and Humanities, also the Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures. And I'm interested in entanglements between humans and the environment, particularly in speculative fiction, though none of the poems, I'm going to be reading poems, none of the poems I'm reading tonight are speculative fiction. This is my first reading as well, so bear with me. So into the poems then, I'm going to give you a brief introduction of where the poems are coming from before I read. So then the first one is called Nightingale, and this was inspired by the fact that some British songbirds have declined in population by more than 50% since the 90s. So in this poem, I'm thinking about my own role in that decline as someone who lives in a built-up area, destroying natural habitats, and also the apathy that we might feel when confronted by the enormity of climate crisis and ecosystem disruption. So there's an I in this poem, but the I isn't really me, but it's also not me, if that makes sense. So this is Nightingale. There has been a murder in the back garden. The magpie sits, chitter-chat, on the neighbour's rooftop, eating the baby piece by piece. I'd seen him go into the bush, a scramble of horrible noise, clawing easily through the thin foliage. Seen him mobbed by the baby's parents, screaming for their child. Finished. He straightens, looks around. Not many other bushes to try. Our ginger Tom watches him. I'm reminded to trim back the hedge. So this next poem, one of my best friends died suddenly from a heart attack at the age of 40 a couple of years ago. And this poem is about a particular part of the grieving process where you have to pass the way other people know and remember the person that you love. So this is Rachel's funeral. Charlotte calls in the middle of the day. For one more time of many, she steps round her own grief to give me mine. So unlike Rachel to do such a thing, to just go and die. It wants to settle in, dust in the breeze of job functionality and maternity appointments. I tried to stay with her, but she is sat on a bench in our path through this forest and we have to leave each other. At the crematorium, we are black in the rain, huddled separately, waiting for the service before ours to finish. The casket arrives, but Rachel isn't here. She was red. The Rembrandt comes on over the tannoy. Had she liked Friends that much? In the service, her oldest friends celebrate all she'd done for them. Someone she'd never met tells us she'd loved giraffes. There's a recent photo of her feeding one in the pamphlet. Her partner took her. He said he'd never marry her. She isn't here. She should be poured into the room so thickly we are encased in the bright amber of her. So this final poem speaks to my experience of pregnancy and the beginnings of motherhood, but also my wonder at the natural world, background in natural sciences as well. So it's about these two combined joys and also plays with scientific language and scales across time and space. So this is knitting. A calcium burst she makes herself. In the genetic cascade, 2 fibres on the mitotic spindle. Poesis comes through transcription. This capsule encapsulates former forms in base pair, remembers our journey from sea to land. Patterning in signal speak, boiling cytoplasms and shuddering divisions make this embryo's genesis. Atoms from another birth have come to form her flesh through mitochondrial connecting kinetics. The cycle turns the needles. Our vasculatures reach each other, the unending braid from beginning to end. Life looped into the world womb, tethering, togethering until our rupture. I hold her. Wrap her in blankets. Remake her with 1 trillion more strands. We are whole. Thank you.
Hi, so my name's Llew Watkins. I've just started my PhD here and was really glad when Heather set up this group, because at first I felt quite cohortless, and it's been really beautiful to now feel like to be part of a community of creative writers. Because I'm doing my PhD part-time, I'm not in a rush to necessarily figure out what it's about, except to say that I'm interested in the way that we create worlds, and that can be when we're reading a text, and drawing especially on Buddhist models of cognition, as well as kind of cognitive science, models of the brain and mind, as well as narratology. What I'm going to read tonight, so as part of the PhD, I'm writing a novel called Hinterland Shift, and I'm going to be reading about kind of the background of my character, my protagonist, Emily. So I'll be reading parts of some sequences to do with her early experiences. Immediately before the bit that I'm writing, the bit that I'm going to be reading, she's been traveling for 5 days through this kind of arduous process called 4 days walking and not dying, in order to reach this location. And the location is Fireship Cove. And then this part begins as she starts to become familiar with her surrounds. Now she is here. It surrounds her. Distant noises confusing as to the placement of a gully or a stair. With her eyes, she can see only the crushed paper walls and the surfaces of rock, glimpsed at the edges. Her body is a ruin. Pain shoots down her legs, and hard pads on her feet crack and ooze. But her mind races, desperate to see properly, to measure with her hands the outside canyons. For now she makes do with feeling the bed beneath her, scrunching the roll of blanket tightly between her fingers. To the birther who brings her food, a girl with a long nose, she says, "I'm ready, I want to get out." When she goes to stand, though, she knows it's too soon, and it takes all her strength not to cry out. She won't be defeated. She hobbles, making sharp inhales each time her feet bite the floor. It takes 2 days, but then she is up and about. It is overwhelming, the light bright and glinting off the rock. The birthers, so many and so tightly together, laughing, bickering, so that she feels immediately an outsider. Many babies and tiny children swaddled or playing. Always one making noise, the heat, the rota, and later Kajose. She surrenders to it all. She is chopping yam. A birther comes from behind her, leaning over, one palm on the table. She can smell the girl's hair, suddenly sweet and earthy. She knows this one, dangerous looking. She's noticed the way the others are around her. The girl grins, a pretty gap in her teeth at the front. That chopping is crazy precise. Taken aback. Oh? Just oh, she thinks. Look, every slice is exactly the same. The girl is touching the lined up pieces of yam now, as if in disbelief. Surely she's not going to blush. She feels the pride, warm in her neck. She tries to respond with a smile, but her mouth makes a line. You're a concentrator, aren't you? When it matters, dryly. Yams matter. That's cute. Life or death. She does smile now, but the girl has turned away, her attention caught by something else. At night, she practices the movements. Everything depends on getting each gesture as crisp as she can. She works over and over, undressing and redressing herself, folding the clothes until they fold themselves. In between sessions, she rests standing, hugging her body to the stony warmth of the breathing chimney that runs up the back of her cave. Then, when she can keep her eyes open no longer, she crawls like a louse into the carefully made bed and stretches out slowly across the matting. She wakes, and the first thing she says each morning is the name, Rennie Mackleton. Many times she repeats it to herself, semi-audibly, many times before beginning to stir. She has the afternoon off, and she wanders aimlessly around the cove. She's learnt the name of the dangerous girl, Kajose, and secretly she is trying to see her. Most don't like the crows. Some think they will go for a baby's eyes if unguarded, but she likes them. They fleck the canyon sides, picking through the rocks for food and cawing at each other in raucous voices. As she climbs across, they waddle aside, beating themselves into the air with their wings and looking back as if to say, I've got my eye on you. She'll be pregnant soon. Will it be heavy? Some of the other birthers make it look easy. Some make it look awful, sweating and complaining. She won't complain, but first is the capsule and the dream and bathhouse, and it might not take. And if it doesn't take or something goes wrong, she bites hard at her lip to cut the train of thoughts. From this angle, it is perfect here. The cove is a creature with many limbs devoted to a single purpose. Her eyes drift across the hewn caves, with the sun behind the hill, now dark, shadowy inlet shaped into the rock, each closely guarding its mysteries as to which parts are natural and which are intervention. Two birthers, one carrying a young kid, are twisting their way down a stair, at times becoming just a gouged V, and then steps again. Watching one wobble, she clenches her jaw, thankful she is not afraid of heights. Faintly, the dinner drum, and her ears pick up once more the tantrums and the crying. Behind an outcrop, she pees, and then starts to rush a little in case she is late. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, right. I think, as you can tell, this is like my first time doing a reading, so I'm a bit jittery. But I'm Heather, so I'm a first-year PhD student at the university. My research focuses on alternative motherhoods and the intersection of maternal trauma, child death and disability. The section I'm reading today is autotheoretical, and it's taken from a larger piece called Curdled Milk, which also features poetry, prose, documentation, and poetic experimentation. For the purpose of this reading, I've pulled together a lot of very small sections, so hopefully it'll read like one cohesive piece, but we'll see how it goes. Okay. 1. Sometimes I feel like a monster, and that all my accumulated dirt is plain to see. I worry that this book is self-indulgent, a crime perpetuated solely by women, and all that I will accomplish through this writing is to tarnish myself further and publicly. And yet I write. In truth, at first it is at the insistence of my PhD supervisor, and then it becomes cliche and trite, and I find myself purging across the page, searching for something amongst his half-digested juices. 2. I'm slowly learning the importance of motherhood, which is to mean I am quickly forgetting the unimportance of motherhood. It would make sense to start at the beginning, but all these thoughts and the moments I want to explore refuse to be quietened by the logic of time and space. I'm alone, and I'm wanting to die. Suicidal ideation is not new or novel, but I've not thought about it with any seriousness since first becoming a mother. I suppose that's how I think of myself. Category of mother first and foremost, person second. Though this line of questioning lacks originality, does not make it less true. I have become, or am increasingly becoming, an image of what should be or is at the expense of selfhood. 3. There have been too many hands inside me, groping and tugging at a failing organ, and now the infection is set in, and my body, in its final act of betrayal, is shutting down. The sepsis comes quickly, and though I've tried to warn the midwife and the doctors that something isn't right, they tell me that I'm wrong. I'm not bleeding after the birth, though I should not call it that. A labour, my baby was stillborn, and having birth before, I know how it should go, how I should feel. My placenta didn't come out properly, I tell them. There was an issue. I tell them, but their ears are deafened by my grief, which it seems is not merely an expression of loss, but is in itself a thief. Having stolen my competency, perhaps even my sanity, every decision I make must be judged by some arbitrary and imaginary set of criteria kept secret from me. Some ignored, and the infection triggers sepsis. I don't want to go to the hospital in the middle of the night. I beg to be left alone when my mother rushes over, pressing her cool palms to my cheeks. The pain comes in waves and I scream. I should tell you that at this point, there is a man or a boy. I'm never sure how to describe him. I'm already hating him and hating myself for being with him, though the parameters of with or without him are at this point in my life blurred. He doesn't want me to go. He thinks I need to sleep it off. Perhaps my grief is manifesting itself physically and the pain has merely become tangible. Once I'm stable enough to be moved, I'm rolled into the room I last saw my son a mere 3 days before. I feel as if I should linger here in this sentence for a moment. Grasping and stuttering for words, I am trying to explain something here that naturally refuses definition, that I find myself shying away from. The room I am taken to, delirious and writhing, is the same room I laboured in, the same room I said goodbye to him in, and the very same room I learnt about the realities of a cold cut in. When I tell them this, hoping that they do not know, hoping that this has been done by mistake, I am told that this is the only room where there are no expectant mothers, the only room untarnished by the presence of the newly born. I am told this with a shrug. And when my mother protests, I beg her for silence, afraid that it is her words, rather than the words of others, that will be too much for me to bear. My body is racked with tremors, and I feel, but do not feel, the tears on my cheeks. I am 23, and next door there is a birthing pool and the cry of a newborn baby being welcomed into the world. 4. Women, they say, can have it all, but say nothing on the cost of this expected or canalized gluttony. In the Barbie movie, the character of Ruth Handler says to Barbie, "We mothers stand still so our daughters can look back to see how far they have come." I should preface this by saying that I liked the Barbie movie. I dressed all in pink, holding hands with my daughter as we watched and laughed at the Barbie movie, hoping that she was discovering something that I'd come to much later. But I hate Ruth's words. I know they can be interpreted in a variety of ways, but I detest this stationary image. I refuse to believe in the concept of stagnation, whether well-meaning or not. And I can't help but fear that this quote is a prettied up, polished way of saying, once I was the picture, now I am the frame. Intensive parenting practice has prolificated maternal self-sacrifice, and Winnicott's theories and good mothering has lent credence to legitimate motherhoods. Mainstream and popular culture actively try to erase the experience of the poor mother, of the single mother, the queer mothers, and let us not forget the women of colour who are also mothers. I'm straying off topic, these threads I'll be discussing later. There will come a time, of course, when my daughter and I will diverge from one another, where even the ghost of our umbilical tie will be stretched to the limit, stretched to breaking. I can never love my mother as much as she loves me. I tell her this, feeding the daughter handed to me, oxytocin firing or misfiring across my neural pathways. I apologise to her, realising for the first time, or more accurately, glimpsing at the complicated pain of motherhood, understanding that as much as I will give this little girl, it will never be enough, because she will never love me the way that I love her. These thoughts are exactly as promised, tangled and imperfect, much like my mothering, much like me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leonie Martin. I'm one of the PhD students. I won't say the oldest student in town, but out of my cohort. So hoping the old brain cells don't let me down. So thank you to Aggie and Heather for organising tonight. So my PhD is on the theme of narrative disruption, how women's bodies tell multiple sclerosis, using an autoethnographic, historiographic approach and narratology. It's going to be a hybrid novel, speculative, a trialogue between three women separated in space and time from medieval Holland to 21st century England. Joined, and the three women are joined by a shared encounter with multiple sclerosis. For tonight, I'm actually reading an extract from a short story. So I've just started the PhD and I'm doing it part-time. So I'm starting with focusing on more the critical and the theoretical. So I haven't written any of the creative part yet. So this is an extract from a short story I wrote for one of the MA assignments. And it's partly inspired by Zadie Smith's The Embassy of Cambodia, which is set in London. And what really captured me about it was the way that Zadie Smith plays with the voices. So you've got this omniscient third-person narrator who is sort of the people of Willesden in London, but then also there's the story, the voice of a young woman who is basically modern-day slavery, living with a family in London, and so the way she uses voice to cover so many really deep themes really spoke to me. So this story is loosely based on that, only it's not set in London, it's set in Chesterfield. Which is where I live. But I did grow up in Sheffield, so I've got a foot in both. So the imaginary residents live in central Chesterfield, and it's the story of a young pharmacist struggling to make sense of the medicalised, mechanised worlds he finds himself inhabiting. Since Shrove Tuesday lunchtime, when he first noticed the ravens, Arthur has made a habit of pausing opposite the welfare centre on his way back from church. Such is the draw of the ravens' distinct voices and blue-black presence that he is prepared to risk the wrath of his boss's precision timekeeping. On the first day, Arthur took breadcrumbs from his pocket and held them up in the flat of his right hand. The ravens had simply stared down at him from their rooftop balustrades. As Arthur waited, three young men with much longer beards than himself and dressed in flowing white robes entered the welfare centre. They didn't seem to notice him standing there, hand raised. The second day he offered breadcrumbs. One of the bearded men turned, nodded at him. Arthur nodded back. The ravens circled. Croak, croak. The third day, one of the ravens flew down and snatched a few of the crumbs from his hand. It was only a moment, but the skin of his palm had tingled in a pleasant way on the spot where the bird's ebony beak made brief contact with his flesh. When I say we were surprised by the appearance of the welfare centre, I don't mean to suggest that the centre is in any way unique in its particularity. In fact, Chesterfield is notable for a number of cultural spiritual cooperatives, in the context of which a Muslim welfare centre does not seem especially strange. On Saltergate, opposite the spot where the miners' welfare used to stand, there is an old brick archway leading to a Hatha yoga studio, where one sees, mostly thin, people entering and exiting with tightly rolled up mats beneath their arms. There is also a Friends meeting house along Ashgate Road, a modern brick building with a sustainable constitution, overlooking the site of a former gasworks and adjacent to the much sought after plots of the Ashgate Allotment Society. On any given day, depending which direction the wind is cutting across the hills from Matlock, there will be a different number of windows open on the 3-storey facade of the Friends meeting house, but seldom any notable sounds rising from its peaceful interior, apart from on a Tuesday evening when the local brownie pack is hiring one of the rooms for completion of personal journey badges. So, we are hardly strangers to cultural spiritual cooperatives here in this part of Chesterfield. And yet, we still find the Muslim Welfare Centre a little surprising. Somehow, it is not the right sort of surprise next to a state-of-the-art medical practice and inhabiting what used to be a Victorian Methodist church. But perhaps, after all, it's not the centre itself which is so surprising, but the croak, croak of the ravens from its twin balustrades. During his teens, a growing obsession with St. Francis of Assisi hadn't gone down well with Arthur's parents. At first, they tried to accommodate a transformation of his bedroom into a chapel. David Beckham was replaced by a crucifix. The Killers by an icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Succour. However, Arthur's diet of bread and water presented much more of an inconvenience, such that his mother eventually bundled his bony limbs into their platinum BMW and took him to see a nutritionist in Sheffield. The nutritionist, who had a particularly fleshy neck, looked him up and down as he cradled himself in a brown plastic NHS chair. If you don't start to eat properly, you'll soon be dead. For his mother's sake, he agreed to expand his menu. But by his 15th birthday, he had swung to the other extreme, such that their grocery bill doubled. Arthur's blue and grey school uniform required frequent upgrades to accommodate his expanding girth. At school, he began to act the fool to cover up his creeping unease with all he believed was being sold to him as the pathway to success and happiness. At weekends, thanks to his newfound popularity as a fool, binge eating, underage beer drinking competitions and fist fighting in the local pubs became his replacement rituals, much to the embarrassment of his father, a successful businessman, and his mother, a psychiatrist. On Maundy Thursday, 6 weeks after Russia launched its special military operation in Ukraine, the sky was low and grey over the balustrades. The ravens unusually silent. Arthur had no breadcrumbs in his pocket that day. He glanced up as he hurried back from church and thought he saw a veiled face at one of the gallery windows on the upper floor of the Muslim Welfare Centre. It made him think about Sister Claire, their first encounter, almost 40 days ago now. Arthur had been tapping in the details of a patient's medical exemption certificate, believing the customer enclosure opposite to be empty, when her voice startled him. "Does he have a name?" she asked. The nun was staring hard at his lion tattoo, the tattoo that had almost cost him his job. Many customers had also stared, but this young nun in black robes with white head trim was the first to pass comment. He glanced round. Damien, his boss, was in the consultation room. His colleagues, Simone and Sam, were watching his every move, while pretending to be absorbed in their prescription fulfillment duties. Floor-to-ceiling stacked shelves surrounded him. Boxed and bottled infusions in varying states of solidity awaited their turn to be scanned and bagged. Swarms of brightly packaged toiletries and cosmetics seemed to rush at him from the customer enclosure, casting him back to the dreaded family trips round Meadowhall shopping centre. "Can I see the lion?" Arthur rolled up his sleeve, offered the inky flesh of his arm to this holy woman in black headdress with white trim. "Such blue eyes." Her accent sounded vaguely Spanish, perhaps French. "Why lion?" Arthur swallowed. "My grandfather. He had the same lion." "Your grandfather? What his name?" "Tommy. Tommy had blue eyes too?" She stared hard at him. "Yes, same blue eyes," he heard himself say. She began to search in her bag for something. "I see you before, no? At church?" Arthur coughed. He didn't need to turn round to know Simone and Sam had heard. The nun pressed a small blue card in his palm, lowered her voice. "I'm Sister Claire. We need help with some gardening work at the convent. If you're interested, give us a call." He was watching the smoked glass door swish closed behind her when Damien shouted from the consultation office. "Simone, take over at the counter. Arthur, we need to talk." Through the smoked glass, Arthur noticed a flash of black feathers.
Hi, I'm Alison, and I'm currently in my third year of creative writing PhD here. My research is about archives, intertextuality and identity for my critical project. And my creative project is a poetry collection which uses domestic objects, formal, official sounding language and found language, for example, the language of advertising is something that crops up a lot, to create an archive of the everyday. The idea is that everyday objects, domestic objects, can often tell us as much or more than official archives can. The project's got 6 sequences of poems and then 1 sequence of poetic mini essays, which will explore the overarching themes in the poetry. So today I'm going to read 3 of the poems, which are very short, and then 1 of the mini essays, which will relate to the content of those poems. So the first poem is from a sequence about candles, and it's called That Dining Out Glamour. And there's thank you here to the Faculty of Arts in Sheffield who published it as part of a creative response to Women's History Month last year. But it's raining again, so instead, tutored housecraft, rookie home economics, soft cloth initiation, naive satisfaction of sponging and sticking, its musty sweet clash, alkyl sulfate, gum arabic, Pacific sconce shining, painstaking collation of co-op and green shield, shared ritualized primping of revered wedding gifts, 3-branched unburned auteur in embossed EPNS for more humble unuse. Improvised half-term bondings, 1 silver plate stratum, layered, unnoted insight of 77-hour weeks contact-hungry routine, gnawing wonted monotony, foam-cleansed fragmentation, coated, lifted, infused with cathartic intrusion, Jimmy Young, Maxwell House, makeshift weekday patina on centuries tarnish, swabbed, buffed up, brushed out, reapplying the gleam, and... Then the next two poems I'm going to read are from a sequence about plates. First one's called What They've Always Wanted. The swallowed discourse of oven to table desire lines, low residue days, wiped down, measured out in milky white, high thermal shock resistant glassware. Its 5-2 rotational seared tally marks, roses Monday to Friday, blue stars for the weekends, patterned opalescent bearers of fried eggs, onion gravy, Aureolan custards congealed, held tongue skin on reheated ennui, home-cooked quarantine. Rebranded, burned into painted obligation of number 10's homilies, airbrushed double spreads touting superior quality, and talked up time-saving, easy care immobility. So practical, affordable, beautifully long-lasting. And then the third poem is called Guaranteed to be Perfect. The must-have vitrified semi-porcelain silence of reshaped, repackaged, replenished reprise. Its honey-voiced 36-piece clean plate covenant acquired ad hoc in sidework finance quotas from Argos. New decades, new start, new lines, same old shit smokescreen, ushered in with lasagna, spag bowl, test run chili, for collectible, coordinated, conversationless grind. Passed off, reinforced with auto-tuned, purring primetime doublespeak. Coiffured cod commonality, pussy bow gilded tyranny, unseemly objection, suffocated, restrained with slash recommended retail price sweet nothings, hand-finished wildflowers, a lover's knot ribbon, an iconic classic and all-time bestseller. So I'm going to move on to the mini essay, which is called There's No Hope in Daintiness and Determination, which is a quotation from Tender Buttons by Gertrude Stein, which has been a big inspiration for the project. There's quite a lot of quotations in this piece from Stein, from Anne Oakley, from Duncan and Marsden, and from various press articles. They're all footnoted in the text version, but I'm not going to read the footnotes out or say quote unquote for ease of listening, as this is a reading and not a conference paper, so I'm not going to do that. But if anybody wants clarification, obviously ask me afterwards. And thanks to Heather on this one, because she was a great help with some reading suggestions as well. Bored, corralled indoors on rained-off half-term afternoons, I would help my mother clean the silver-plated candelabra, stick customer rewards scheme stamps from mum's supermarket shop or dad's petrol into dog-eared, jaundiced collector's books. While it didn't compare with cycling in the park or inching round the backyard on flimsy, ankle-wrenching roller skates, there was a certain novelty, a satisfaction even, in seeing the shiny metal emerging radiantly from its blackened cocoon or completing a full page, better still a whole book of stamps. It was, it seemed, not such a bad way to spend your day. At about the same time that these routine domestic tasks began to present for me an apparently acceptable ad hoc solution to my wet weather boredom, the sociologist Anne Oakley was publishing a radical work which was to become fundamental in redefining the way housework was viewed, both within established sociological practice and by society more generally. In the Sociology of Housework, 1974, housework is classified as actual work, rather than as merely an aspect of the feminine role in the family, and furthermore revealed to be a source of boredom and isolation. Feelings of fragmentation, monotony, and loneliness were commonplace for the women Oakley interviewed. It is only recently that I have paused to consider that maybe the ubiquitous presence of the radio in various of my family's homes, BBC Radio 2 for mum, BBC Radio Sheffield for my grandma, and the third programme for my nan, might have represented something other than simply a love of music. Oakley's study also highlighted the punishing nature of the weekly working hours for her respondents, which for most total between 70 and 89, way in excess of the commitment expected of those in full-time paid employment. Additionally, Oakley invites the reader to reflect on the role of media messaging and the matrilineal handing on and rehearsal of domestic tasks in creating a sense of obligation. I don't recall the carefully sponged and buffed candelabra ever being used. A need to replicate previously set standards, which in reality are impossible to consistently maintain. Think Fairy Liquid's series of commercials from the 1960s and 1970s, in which a mother assiduously describes its superior dish cleaning properties to a female child while simultaneously reassuring her that it will keep her hands soft over the day's many washes. Regardless of how consciously or not this handing on takes place, it is certainly hard to believe that my grandmother, having no daughters, would have encouraged my father to while away a few damp hours by bleaching the toilet or ironing some sheets. Over half a century before Oakley finally made explicit the unspun, unglossed reality of these women's experience, the experimental examination of household objects in Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons, 1914, feels remarkably prescient of her findings. If we read Stein's 1910s poems with Oakley's 1970s research in mind, we might see perhaps in the fragmented text and syntactic disruptions a foreshadowing of the fragmented nature of housework described by Oakley's participants. We might also find a synergy between repeated words and motifs, both within Stein's individual poems and across the collection. Dirt, dustiness, cleanliness, a sense of what is necessary, and the concerns raised by Oakley's interviewees when recounting the pressures they feel. One such repetition, disgrace, may be said to go even further, its use in conjunction with objects so intensely associated with perceptions of femaleness, reinforcing notions that a lack of attention to cleanliness, either in the home or in connection with sexual purity, is an undesirable trait in a woman, and moreover something by which she is judged. Based on this comparison, it seems despite a 60-year gap and many societal changes between the two publications, both Stein and Oakley are signposting that the female sense of self and the way that self is viewed by society are inextricably bound up with the ability to satisfactorily execute housework tasks. A further half-century on from Oakley's study then, does it still have resonances in 21st century Britain? We would probably all agree that with increased numbers of women entering the workplace in the intervening 50 years, the allocation of domestic duties has necessarily evolved, changed for the better. However, research undertaken throughout this period suggests there is still some distance to go. In the 1990s, for example, Duncan and Marsden found that as a result of these changes, women were now working a triple shift, which involved paid employment, housework, and taking on the bulk of the emotion work required to sustain relationships with partners and family. More recently, a 2016 survey by the Office of National Statistics disclosed that on average, women were doing 40% more of household chores and childcare than men. Meanwhile, a project by the Institute of Fiscal Studies and University College London revealed that during the COVID-19 lockdown of 2020, this situation was exacerbated, meaning in homes where there is a working mother and father, women are doing more chores and spending more time with children. That's obviously a very heteronormative data set that was used there. In terms of how this is reflected in the media, we might again consider Fairy, whose commercials for dishwasher tablets feature, at time of writing, a gruff-voiced cartoon biker baby paired with a female voiceover, though their laundry products, despite now focusing on health and safety, still feature a mother and child scenario. And ultimately, despite being eased by an ever-increasing arsenal of high-tech gadgets, housework remains, for me and for many others, I'm sure, boring, unrewarding, unrewarded. So what exactly is it that keeps us bought in, locked in never-ending rubber-gloved combat with self-propagating cat fluff, toast crumbs, coffee grounds? Among the untarnished memories of those rainy afternoons, do the legacy of obligation, the fear of disgrace, still loiter, sleeves rolled up, cloth in hand? Thanks.
Hi guys, I'm Ella. This is my first reading, so please excuse the shake in my voice because I've never done anything like this before. So my PhD is in folklore and specifically folk horror and how that sort of revived itself throughout the pandemic and how we find storytelling in nature as a source of comfort in times of societal crisis, I suppose we could say. I'm not talking about that tonight. This is actually an extract from my first novel, which is due to be published this year in November, which still doesn't feel quite real. So this is completely a shameless self-promotion, so thank you for listening. So yeah, jump into it. A net of salt water. There was once a fisherman who lived in a city made of marble and ivy. Tall towers of gleaming white stretched up to the skies, winding vines of verdant green wrapping around them. During the day, the city kept its inhabitants safe from the hot, relentless beat of the sun. The streets were often quiet, the heat of the midday too much to bear for longer than an hour. At night, however, the city came alive. The white towers, home to the thinkers and philosophers, glowed with bright candlelight. Markets sprung up along the wide streets, and under colourful silk canopies, spices, cloth, and curios changed hands. The fisherman had little time for the intrigues of the city. He loved his birthplace, but the love he held for the sea was more. This city of marble and ivy was built atop tall cliffs of chalk and limestone. Long twisting stairways were cut into the soft rock, and these led down to quays and harbours of wood. The fisherman commanded his own ship, a handsome boat of stone pine with 2 masts and 4 vast canvas sails. The sails were a bright cobalt and seaweed green, and when the ship danced through the waves, its sails appeared to be part of the water itself. The fisherman took pride in his vessel, and out of all the other ships docked below the city of marble and ivy, its wood shone the brightest. The sea called to the fisherman as a lover would call to their soulmate. Its soft whispers drifted in through the open window of the fisherman's small house at night. He found beauty and awe in its stillness, in its rage, and in its lawlessness. All men became equals upon the sea, for there was only one master out there, and it did not work in terms of life and death. The fisherman spent more and more time on the sea, or else working on his ship. The meagre crew under his command spoke of him in hushed voices around mugs of wine after their job was finished for the day. Of how the fisherman seemed with every passing day to become more like the sea they sailed on. Of how he would not always answer a call from another crew member, but rather stare off out at the horizon with something akin to longing on his face. As time passed, the fisherman lost more and more of his crew to other vessels. And as more time passed, the fisherman became strange. He did not seem to eat or sleep as other men needed to. His bed was hardly slept in, and his house remained unlit during those bright market nights. If someone were to look over the cliff edge, however, they would spy the small flickering of a fire, tinted green from saline-soaked wood. The sand of the beach became his bed, and the gentle wash of waves his lullaby. The fisherman would stand for hours at a time, waist deep in the surf, and merely stare out across the horizon. And then one day, the fisherman disappeared. Only 2 people in the entire city of marble and ivy noticed his vanishing: his erstwhile first mate, and the one whom at one point he may have called a lover. His ship no longer docked at the cliffside quay. The cobalt and sea green sails no longer embraced the horizon visible from those tall towers. Deep below, a man who was once a fisherman hung suspended in the water. He neither sank like his ship had, nor floated to the surface like carrion. His hair and coat drifted around him, his eyes closed. His mind sang softly out into the water. The sea heard the song and listened. It had never heard anything quite like it before and found it beautiful, but melancholy. The man who had once been a fisherman hung in the water in something like sleep. The sea held him gently in its embrace, and then, after a time listening to that strange song, a time in which the man's city had grown, fallen, and become nothing more than ruins, let him go. The tang of salt water filled his nose, and the man who was once a fisherman breathed again for the first time in a century.
Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Greenwood. And people finish shuffling their seats. Anyhow, I started here in the fall of 2019, just before COVID struck. And like Lou said, I have definitely felt a bit cohortless. And I really appreciate the work that Heather and others have put into organizing tonight. So thank you. I just hit submit on my thesis on Saturday. So this will be, we're really happy. This will be my last student reading, I guess. The first one was in a lecture theatre very similar to this in the University of Victoria in Canada. And I remember how utterly terrified I was. So I think for those of you who've read for your first time tonight, you've just been magnificent. And the nerves never really do go away, I'm here to tell you. So my thesis was called Gothicizing a Poetics of Displacement. And I was meant to be writing about Scottish Gothic poetry. And I did that in the critical part, but in the creative part, I ended up writing a poetry manuscript called Siberian Spring. And I'm sure some of you have heard of the stories about prehistoric animals coming out of the permafrost. And the mammoth tusks that are being found there are worth a lot of money. So there's a sequence in Siberian Spring called Tuskers. And I'm going to read 2 poems from that, and then I'll read a third. So the first one, Tuskers Camp. At the campsite, something silent as gas, unseen as bacteria, coils around their ankles, while the tuskers warm themselves with vodka by the fire. A line of drying socks strung out like bunting, the worn, filthy flags of a weary army. In the exhausted light of a starry dusk, their dirt-streaked faces are carved with shadow, as if they have become crudely wrought totems of themselves. They have fallen into a bog, engulfed by the same tarry stupor that swallowed the ancient beasts, trapping them in time when the ice arrived. So it's a very dangerous environment. There's, not just the danger of digging out the tusks, but and having, dirt collapse on you and that sort of thing. There's rival mammoth tusk pirate gangs. There's police, and there's bears and such. So the tuskers are armed and they have dogs. Ceremony. Dogs snarl, guarding the spoils, scrawny, flea-scratching dragons dispatched from lore. A guard prowls the perimeter with a rifle after a food bag hung on a branch is disemboweled, like the drum-tight stomach of an untrained pup that ran off barking after a presence in the trees. Carrion birds conducting a ceremony of wingspan and sky lead by circles to where it lies, legs up, adorned with 1,000 black diamonds, the flies. I just have one more poem to read. There's another section in the manuscript called Wunderkammer, and it's about some of the various other types of animals that have come out of the permafrost. So it's sort of a created or curated collection of poems about these. One of these was a foal that died when it was about 2 weeks old. When it was found in 2019, it was like 42,000 years old, or 42,000 years it had spent in the ground, with liquid blood inside of it. And this is a little bit about the cloning attempts that have occurred on this horse. And it ends with a summoning spell. And obviously, I should mention again, I was in Gothic studies, so it's very Frankenstein-y. Lenskaya horse. Bogdobbin. Equus lenensis, leggy newborn foal. Dirt stiffened, like a toy abandoned and exposed by melting snow, its bay plush caked with clay. The mud he drank when he drowned, and a guzzle of mare's milk turning sour, slosh inside, a gut fermenting undigested dream. His body is a shriveled wineskin, stowing dregs of a vinegary elixir, the infant heart a veiny sponge, a sop with the world's oldest blood. In a Siberian lab, scientists draw fluid from the golem on the slab, seeking in vials of urine and cruor claret conjurations to reconstitute its soul in a petri dish. The chosen host in sterile stable stands placid in her stall, vessel made ready to bear and birth a shadow of the resurrected foal. Little horse of the apocalypse, whose blunt mahogany head is an antique instrument carved with sound holes, whose unshod hooves are crude omegas carved with luck, whose equine gaze is a dirt-glazed pane through which the past stares into the now known now. Shudder, creature, stamp your feet free of muck, snort puffs of dust as sound screeches dryly across the taut, untuned chords strung in your neck. Awakening shriek, the scream you must scream to summon your rider. Rise, stallion, whinny, flick your black tail. That's me.
Good evening, everyone. I'm in my final year. I know Adam's feeling really sad that I'll be leaving him soon. But chill. Right. I started off looking to capture the stories of the Windrush generation and their descendants because I was really serious and really earnest about what I wanted to do. And then, maybe 4 months later, I realised I didn't really realise it. Richard Stedman Jones said, you have to keep writing about trauma. And I thought, do I have to keep writing about trauma? Now, that is a question, and that began to change my work. And so the first bit of my research is about trauma, slavery, colonialism. Then the next part, I started to investigate other things about who I was as a Black person, because I'm still gathering the stories about Black people, but it's autoethnographic. And then the last part, I'm having more fun. I mean, who would have figured it that I'm paying to learn to have fun? And the other thing that changed, because when I had meetings with Adam, he'd sit there and he'd go, meaning, maybe you should think about looking at this a different way, because he wanted me to put more of the Black experience, not just to use Western thinking. It's like, but why? Where is the Black experience? And it reminded me of Bob Marley. Marley said, you've got to free yourself from mental slavery. So although I thought I was free, I was still tangled up in all the things to do with colonialism and slavery and the drama of being Black and racism. And then, so my story began to change. And this is one of the last few stories that I wrote, which is fun. It's a bit rude, but my gosh, coming from a person who was so uptight about what it meant to be Black, to be able to write this, it's a miracle in itself. So, yes. So it's all Adam Piet's fault if you don't like it. Right. It's called The Flap. Kalisha was worried about the flap. It's too big for a cat. I'm trying to put on a Caribbean accent. I can't do it, but I'll try. Right. She flicked her arms open in a grand gesture, glaring at Shaquille with that stare. Kalicia's Jamaican accent always made it seem like she was spitting out her sentences, her throat almost straining to throw up the words before releasing them like a machine gun fire. When she gesticulated as well, which was pretty much a constant, it was terrifying. Shaquille, her landlord, was used to all this. He'd learned not to make eye contact with Kalisha. But then Shaquille never made eye contact with anyone. He looked like he was trying to read his own t-shirt all the time. When he spoke, it was mumbled and incoherent, as if he was sleepwalking. This forced Kalisha to lean in towards him just so she could hear. Well, you know, you're right, and that, well, it was for a dog. Like I had this dog, and I mean, it wasn't big. I mean, you're right, it's too big for a cat. But a man? No way, no. I mean, it's safe. I'm skinny. Look, I get through. Kalisha lifted the flap, and in a snap, her head was through. Shaquille could see for himself that with a wriggle of her slender shoulders, she would be out and free. She also had very dark skin, he noticed, even more dark because of the bright orange vest she had on. Hello, yelled Kalisha through the flap. Would someone like to come rape me or slit me throat? Hello? Single Jamaican girl here? All alone? Well, you see, yes, at a push, maybe you could, maybe, I don't know, get through, but rapists couldn't. No way. I mean, I couldn't. Definitely not. I mean, I'm not a rapist, but like I say, a man, no way. Little man gets in, little rapist with knife. She poked Shaquille in the chest. Shaquille had known Kalisha for 12 months. She worked in the Caribbean takeaway at the end of the street. He loved his jerk. Sorry, that's all his tenants were Caribbean, gardeners, hospital workers and cleaners. And every Sunday after church, they would invite him around for drinks and food. And before long, they had converted him to traditional Caribbean diet: jerk chicken, curry goat, plantain, rice and peas, and of course, fried dumplings. When the takeaway opened, Shaquille soon gave up eating his customary Pakistani cuisine and became an honorary Jamaican. Even his drinks of choice were now Jamaican: Guinness, punch, and sweetened pineapple juice. Then a room became vacant. Big Mikey married an Irish girl and decided to try out Dublin because they're real Europeans. Shaquille was desperate to have a plumber. Shaquille was desperate to have a plumber join his immigrant tenants. He was sure he was the only landlord who didn't have a plumber, and it caused him sleepless nights. Well, his dripping tap and grumbling drains kept him awake. Hence, he needed a plumber. But he got Kalisha instead. Little skinny, big Afro Kalisha with gold ring glasses and tight vest tops. That black skin Kalisha, the skinny girl with the loud voice and the foghorn laugh, the girl he thought about every night and every morning. Poor old Shaquille, the The daily strain on his wrist was unbearable. To be fair, Shaquille hadn't set out to lure Kalisha into his palace of dubious pleasures. Rather, she just dumped herself in his lap. He didn't complain. Word quickly spread about his vacant room. Big Mikey had been a popular guy in the community. He left a void. Shaquille had a card written out for Caribbean takeaway for the window. He even had a card written in Polish. Sizable community in Pittsmore, Sheffield, he thought. A concerted bilingual advertising campaign. Shaquille's plan was to stick the cards up and people would be knocking his door down for the room, maybe even someone English. He needn't have bothered, for the moment Shaquille entered the takeaway, a familiar loud voice, "Have you room? You can rent me?" Well, thing is, what I want is, and then we have to consider Kalisha snatched the cards from him and threw away the Polish version, reading the English one while sucking her teeth. 600 too much, I give you 5. That good? How could Shaquille say no? His gaze moved from her demanding face to his t-shirt, a Motorhead one, to the floor, to the cabinet filled with chili patties. He could almost hear them yelling at him. "Don't leave us, Shaquille. We need you. You need us. Say yes. You can never go back to samosas. Piss her off and you'll never taste our delights again." Shaquille sighed. They were right. The patties never lie. He nodded in agreement, and Kalisha took this nod as his commitment to her tenancy and reduced the rent. She moved in that night. When Shaquille saw all the bags she had, he wondered how she had packed so quickly. Does she live out of a suitcase, or rather suitcases? The room was a ground floor studio with its own ensuite shower and loo, complete with a small kitchenette. But when he first inherited the property, Shaquille used this small space as his own living space to maximize the rental opportunities. However, a brief fling with a Bayesian called Simone encouraged him to take the converted attic instead. Here, there was a small roof garden where he and Simone would do blow and fuck under the stars. It sounded romantic, but he was allergic to the wood used on the decking, and for 3 months his backside was covered in rash. Simone inevitably left. "Man, you're lazy. You talk like you're chewing a wasp, and you got a really spotty arse." She wrote on her goodbye note, stylishly scrawled on a toilet roll. Shaquille opted to remain upstairs, to be left alone with his bong and the stars, while his little Caribbean enclave grew below him. Some of his tenants were suspicious of his reasons for always dating black women. Others thought him sad, but most thought he was pathetic. But they liked him. Anyway, Shaquille did in fact have a dog. He had no idea what breed it was, but it clearly had no breeding. Mess everywhere and the shit. Oh man, the shit. It was Shaquille's fault, but he couldn't quite grasp that a dog had a strict routine. Sleep, eat, shit. And then repeat. Forever. Shaquille's routines were far more haphazard, and the sleep part of his own personal regime could sometimes extend to a full, uninterrupted 16 hours. With that in mind, Shaquille got a dog flap. installed, enabling the mongrel to get out into the garden easily and then do its business. After half a dozen angry Jamaicans thumped on his door complaining about what they kept stepping in, Shaquille decided to put the dog up for adoption at Thornbury Animal Sanctuary. He didn't make it to the dog's home, however, because the stupid pooch ran under a bus. But it was a problem solved. And Simone was one of the people who helped him that day. So even in his tragic death, that pooch was doing some good, bringing people together. But now the long dead canine was keeping people apart. Kalisha was not happy with the flap. It was potentially a deal breaker. Though with over 12 large suitcases stacked up in the room, Shaquille was mentally praying that her performing a vault face was not really on the cards. In fact, it gave him an idea. You could stack for now, not forever, you could stack your suitcases in front of the door and I'll get a new door. Yes, a brand new door for you, especially, for you. As he spoke, Shaquille's voice was just dwindling away as his face filled up from neck to forehead with the brightest of red flushes. Kalisha pursed her lips, crossed her arms and shook her head. No new door, no good. What? Shaquille was flummoxed. His grand romantic gesture, a new door shut down in flames. Kalisha went over to a small list bag, the sort of Louis Vuitton ripoff often flogged in the sheath market. She unzipped it and two little kittens hopped out, one white with black markings, the other black with white markings, unbearably cute, like little negative versions of each other. They couldn't yet meow, they just squeaked. Yin and yang, announced Kalisha. You like cats? Shaquille was stunned. A bead of sweat was forming somewhere. In his mind, he was calm and lucid and able to say this simple little sentence, I'm allergic to cats. What he actually said was, I love them. Yes, really, love them. I can have a cuddle. Whether Shaquille knew it or not, that simple question was really intended for Kalisha. But rather than give him the hug he desired, Kalisha handed Shaquille one of the little kittens. As he held it in his hands, the cat purred and licked his stubbly chin. A nervous laugh, another bead of sweat, quite possibly in his underpants. And Shaquille stroked the pussy, not quite what he had hoped for. We get a new flap. Yes, good. You get 3 patties for 1 week, Kalisha walked up and tweaked Shaquille's cheek and kissed the kitten on the head. Maybe 2. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that one. Thank you so much. I don't know, Heather, what's the plan? Do you want to take any questions maybe quickly?
Personally?
Anyone has any questions? The truth is that me looking around, I can see that we've got here undergraduate creative writers, MA creative writers, alumni creative writers, so there could be potentially questions coming. Anyone? Otherwise, shall we just say a huge thank you to our VAs? Thank you. See you soon.